Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for coming. And welcome to the Gray Associates Demand Trend webinar designed specifically for community college professionals. This is not your average webinar. It's an opportunity to gain insights into labor market data for program evaluation and use data to debunk common myths about community college programs. I again want to thank you for attending. You will receive a link to the webinar recording and presentation slides in the next few days. Please look for it in your email. We have with us Pete, who is not only a vital part of Gray, but also a program evaluation expert. And he will be walking us through our presentation. So a few housekeeping items to get started with. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a place labeled Q&A. Please feel free to add your questions there. We will get to as many as we can during the session, and we'll follow up later with you if we run out of time. And have you been wondering about launching a particular new program or what the potential job market looks like for your students? At the end of the presentation, we will give you the opportunity to review programs in real time with PES and Gray's Director of Customer Success. You can pop your program request into the Q&A at any time during the presentation. And now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Pete.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. I am going to dive right into today's presentation and walk you through the demand trends, specifically for community colleges and the relevant award levels today. Before I do start, I want to share with you all, Marianne mentioned PES. PES refers to our program evaluation system that we've developed here at Gray. And really, this is more than just the software and the data that goes into making program evaluations. Really, at the center of the target highlights the data component in that we first look at markets and we provide all external market data as it relates to student demands, employment, and competition, and how programs score across those categories. We then look at margins, and we have a system that tracks internal financials by academic program to be able to see how much money, essentially, programs are making across the institution. And then there's academic standards looking at things like external pass rates, nurses taking the NCLEX exam, but also looking at your internal outcomes like retention and graduation rates. And finally, there's the mission of the institution, which is less a quantitative number, more qualitative, but certainly including that in terms of whether or not a program fits with the overall mission of the institution. And the reason I say it's more than just the data and software is because all of this put together still does not tell you what programs to start or which ones to grow, sustain, stop, fix, and so on. There's really more that goes into this, and that's where the people and the right process wrapped around all of this data comes in handy. And so it's really, in our belief, it should be a fair and open or transparent process involving folks from academic or institutional leadership really through the individual faculty teaching these programs or the courses within them, because not included in this data is a lot of knowledge and expertise as it relates to local market information that might not be captured in the data, or just accreditation or other financial hurdles that again might not be included in some of the information that you're able to pull for all programs, but that folks know and just from working in these programs daily. So it's really important to include all of that as you're evaluating your current programs, but also looking for potential new programs to start. So with that, and I bring that up because a lot of the data in our program evaluation system is what we'll be looking at today as we drill down into the student demand trends, as well as when we look at some of the employment indicators in terms of what growth or declines have looked like over the recent months. So first, we'll dive into student demand. And we've got several different sources of metrics that we look at, two of which we'll be covering today. Really three. There's one not captured here that we'll cover in a few slides. But really the point of having multiple sources is so that you're not relying on any one particular source to make a decision or recommendation about what program to start or what to do with your current programs. And so while some data has holes, some are also lagging. So as we think about, and these will be the two different sources we look at today, there's first Google searches, which is a much more current data set in that these are folks who will be looking at the results through July 2023. So we're able to see search volumes for particular keywords as they relate to programs in July of 2023. So what are people looking for today? And then from there, we move to the enrollment data, which gives you a better sense of how many students are actually enrolling in these programs. But we're looking at the most recent year. So these are folks who were in these programs in the most recent academic year, which is now through the 22-23 year. And then going back farther, we do have IPEDS data, and more folks are probably familiar with this data set, but it is a bit lagging in that for even a certificate or an associate's degree, you're looking at completions through 21. We'll hopefully soon, though it's delayed, have 2022. But those students also started anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4, depending on what award level you're looking at, 6 years ago, based on when they were initially interested in a particular program. So while it is potentially a little more complete in that we have it for all programs or from all Title IV institutions, it is a bit of a lagging indicator and gives you more a sense of how many students are getting through a program, less so how many students are interested in that particular program today. So with that, I'm going to dive into our leading indicators, which are Google search volumes. First, before I jump in, we do track over 900 programs, which account for more than 90% of all US completions. So it is a rather comprehensive sample of data in terms of the number of search volumes we're tracking. So that's the definition of the source. In terms of how to read the charts that I'll be walking you through the Google searches, as well as some of the other different sources we track. First off, we've got 3 bars representing the 3 years of data. So the darker bar that you see in the back, that dark blue bar, represents 2021. The bar in the middle, the light blue bar, is 2022. And then that greenish teal bar to the right represents 2023. And we can see we're looking at July this month, Google searches were up 10% for the workforce programs specifically that we track in our system. And if we actually look back at last month, it's up about 5% compared to the volumes in June. So it's up both month to month and year to year when we look at Google search volumes in July, which is a great sign for our workforce programs as we're thinking about future enrollments. In terms of the program specifically in July, based on what folks are searching for, this chart here shows what programs were the highest searched in July of 2023. And we've bucketed the bars based on colors in terms of the types of programs there are. So the darker bars, and you'll see this throughout some of the other slides as well, represent our CTE or our career and technical education programs. Those sort of teal bars represent healthcare programs, and then the light blue are in the other bucket, so not a technical classification. And we can see here in terms of the programs with the highest searches among the direct to workforce programs, 6 out of the 10 are in that CTE category, with cosmetology and commercial truck and bus driver the top 2. And this list is very similar to the list that we saw last month and other months throughout the year, in that large programs tend to continue to be large until others surpass them. So it's not uncommon to see a similar list each month. There are a few changes here and there. For example, auto mechanics tech at the bottom of the list, now showing up in our top 10, was not in the top 10 last month. But much of the rest, medical and clinical assisting, electrician, EMT paramedic, medical billing and coding, HVAC tech, nail specialists, and legal assistant have all been hovering around the top 10 and were there last month, I believe. In terms of the fastest growing programs based on year-over-year growth, we've got a few other programs in terms of our categories now showing up for the fastest growing. So we saw legal assistance number 2 here was on our one of our 10 largest programs in terms of searches as well. But number 1 at 56% growth year over year, we have bookkeeping and accounting tech. So those are your certificate and associates bookkeeping programs that we're looking at here. And then we have some healthcare programs at 3 through 5, medical or health info, medical records, medical billing and coding, MRI tech, a couple more CTE programs in diesel mechanics and HVAC maintenance, a business operations support, occupational therapist assistant, and then nail specialist again. So there's certainly some overlap as we see a couple of these, a few of these really were on our 10 largest and are also growing. So those could certainly be programs of interest as you're thinking about big growing areas. Those can be very solid programs for offering if you're looking to attract more students. And, I know we're focusing on student demand here, but also obviously looking at the employment opportunities, which we'll touch on a bit later, is equally important as you're thinking about what programs to start. In terms of enrollment trends now, we're going to look at new enrollments this month. Last month, we looked at total enrollments for the two different award levels we're looking at, certificate and associates. Today, we're looking at new enrollments for the 2022-23 academic year, both fall and spring. And if we look at certificate first, we can see that new enrollments, unlike total enrollments, are actually up each of the last 2 years. So we did have a downward trend, certainly during the start of COVID was in there in that period as well. But in the 21-22 up 4% and another 4% in 22-23. We're still not up to the levels we were at in the 2018-19 year, but certainly positive to see that we've got 2 years now of new enrollment growth at the certificate level. And for those of you who were on last month's or watched the webinar last month or saw the slides, you'll see that these new enrollments have not quite caught up to total enrollment growth yet as we look at the certificate and associates programs, where those negative trends are still sort of flowing through the total enrollments each of the years. But as we look at associates, the other reason for that is this being 2-year programs, certificates should catch up in terms of total enrollments. I think they really kind of are now. Associates a little delayed, being a longer program. So you've got that extra year there in particular. But finally, this trend is also reversed for the most recent year. It was still down quite a bit, another 7% after 2 declining years, but is finally back up a little bit, albeit only 2%, but that's still a positive sign to see that cliff that folks have been discussing, and we hear a lot in the news, which it certainly is true in certain markets, is certainly turning around in terms of what we're seeing in enrollment growth. Now, taking this a step further as well, here are the highest in terms of new enrollments certificate programs, or the programs with the most new enrollments in that most recent year. Again, in those similar buckets that we saw prior. And I should mention, I have the source here too, that this is all National Student Clearinghouse data. So this is again, similar to IPEDS, much more complete than our Google searches, where we're pulling information on keywords. This is coming straight from the National Student Clearinghouse in terms of total enrollments and new enrollments. And here, just looking at the list of the ones with the most new enrollments in this most recent year, we've got welding tech at the top of the list, and 4 other CTE programs showing up in the top 10: auto mechanics tech, HVAC tech, cosmetology, and electrician. Got 1 business program, the largest one, business administration and management. And then several healthcare programs: medical assisting, nursing assistant, licensed practical nurse, and EMT paramedic. And this should really not be a surprising list. These are, again, programs that folks are aware of in terms of the largest programs that exist. So not surprising that the new enrollments continue to be the largest in these programs as well. In terms of the fastest growing programs based on new enrollment, these are the 10 fastest growing certificate programs again. And so we've got a few in the CTE, a couple healthcare, a few tech, and a couple others. At the top of the list, we see commercial truck and bus driver. We also saw that in our Google searches. So again, as you're thinking about, how you evaluate programs, it's always a good sign when more than one source confirms a number that you might see in terms of just size or growth. Even better so for growth. So we know that more students are looking for it and a lot of students are enrolling in it. Then we have our criminal justice at 19% growth year over year. A few tech programs, information technology, computer programming, and computer and info sciences. Cosmetology growing 12%. Early childhood education, and then our couple of healthcare programs, EMT and nursing assistant, and finally welding tech, which we saw as the in terms of the most or highest or most largest volume of new enrollments. It's also one of the 10 fastest growing programs at 8% growth year over year. Now switching over to associates in terms of the fastest growers, we've got a business program at the top here with 103,000 new enrollments in the most recent year, which is, as you can see, much larger than any other program on this list, and obviously as this list keeps going, with registered nursing at number 2 with 38,000 completions compared to that 103,000. And then moving down the list, we've got computer science, psychology general program, biology, engineering, criminal justice, health services / allied health, our accounting and bookkeeping, and biological and physical sciences. So a much different list in terms of the types of programs that we saw. A couple healthcare here, a couple business programs, but overall, obviously looking at a much different type of program with some more transfer programs showing up on the list here than maybe your typical direct to workforce types of programs. And then in terms of the fastest growing, we do have cybersecurity at number 1 on the list, which should not be surprising. This has been a growing field across all award levels, not just associates, but certainly as we look up in award level as well, this has been of interest lately. Then we have child development growing 19%, education, visual and performing arts, computer science, kinesiology and exercise science, another arts program, drama and theater arts, then rad tech, arts studies, and auto mechanics tech. So in terms of the fastest growing, again, a much different list than we saw earlier, and not really at all similar to the list on the prior page in terms of the largest programs, with cyber again not being a surprise, but seeing the arts on here is much different than in terms of the volumes, not as big as some of those programs, but certainly growing. All of the programs you see here are growing 10% or more compared to the prior year based on new enrollments. Now, switching gears, I mentioned there's another source of data we track. We don't really look at this in terms of evaluating programs in a scoring sense, and I'll get into our scoring a little bit when we talk about the program of the month. But this is data that you can look at to help with your curriculum and come up with some potential ideas with maybe a program or certificate or even just a course that you all offer. So on this screen here, we're tracking, we track the online enrollment data from a couple of the different MOOCs. And this in particular that we're looking at is Coursera, which is one of the larger ones. And here we're looking at the cumulative enrollment volumes based on course category for those volumes through July of 2023. And we can see here that 4 out of the top 10 are in the data and tech areas, which is probably not surprising. And then we have some other different types of areas listed as well. But number 1 on this list, as you can see, is data analysis, which is becoming a hot and big topic in every type of field. So not just business, but in all different industries, the ability to analyze data is becoming more and more important. Then in terms of the other data and tech fields, at number 4, we've got software development. At number 7, we've got machine learning. And at number 9, mobile and web development. So again, just these have, in terms of the cumulative enrollment volumes that we've tracked, this is, not a surprising list in terms of what folks have been interested over the long term. Much of these probably still ring true today in terms of what folks are enrolling in. And then for the other categories, in terms of, again, the long-term volumes, we've got personal development, business essentials, leadership and management, then music and art, learning English, and psychology down at the bottom of the list here. And now in terms of the fastest growing categories, again, focusing on those data categories, this is looking at, again, the year-over-year change. It's looking at July of 2023, and we can see that, again, number one on the list is data analysis, which is, in terms of the total volume change at 3.6 million, is much larger than even number two on this list, which is leadership and management. And then we do have a couple other data and text. We see software development on this is growing, and machine learning is growing. So again, looking at those data and tech fields, not all that surprising when I look at this, based on, again, what more and more folks are looking for in the industry across all different types of jobs. And then we do have other areas, business essentials, again, personal development, design and product is an interesting one, support and operations, learning English, and marketing. So again, this should provide you with helpful information as you're thinking about new program ideas, or even just what curriculum you should all be teaching within certain programs that you're offering today. This is really an important thing to look at to see what are students interested in. And then in a little bit, we'll be able to marry that up with what are the skills that employers are looking for. And so that takes us to our next section, which is looking at the employment data. And again, I know a lot of institutions are looking at this information today. It really is important to look at more than just, not just one source, but more than one category as well. I know a lot of, as you think about those direct to workforce types of programs, rely heavily on the employment data, or whatever the sort of the state labor workforce development within your state may be suggesting or seeing in the employment numbers. But if you're going to invest a lot in the of capital in terms of starting a new program, it's really important to make sure there is student demand as well, because you don't want to launch a new program or put a lot of investment into a current program if there's no student interest, because that can cost a lot of money and not really drive much demand if there's no interest. So it is important to look at everything. And before I really dive into what the data shows, this is one thing we always like to discuss on our webinars or share with you all in terms of how to think about what jobs folks will do when they graduate from a certain program. And for this, we've built and enhanced, starting with the government crosswalk, but going through many iterations of enhancements, looking at other data on what graduates from programs actually do. This just shows an example. And the crosswalk I refer to in this is what we call the SIPSOC crosswalk, the classification of instructional programs to standard occupation codes. And if we look at the NCES crosswalk, which is sort of the starting point, which many folks do use still today, 78% of programs place less than 20% of graduates in jobs for which they're directly prepared. So relying strictly on this crosswalk is not all that helpful as you're looking at potential jobs that students can go into when they graduate, both in looking at the counts as well as the outcomes in terms of wages. And so this is really important to understand as you're thinking about this information. And just as an example, kind of jumping ahead here, we pulled out one program, Early Childhood Education and Teaching. And this is the NCES crosswalk, basically says they become school teachers of a few different levels. Where in reality, if we go and look at the full list. And this, I will say, is focused specifically on bachelor's, but we can see that those early childhood education graduates go into 150 different SOCs after graduation. So using that NCES crosswalk misses 144 potential SOC codes that these students actually go into. And we can see, and this is using the American Community Survey data, which tells us for folks with a bachelor's degree what they majored in and ultimately what field they're employed in. And so obviously we're focused on certificate and associate's programs, but this is still a very helpful point in thinking about transfer programs. So as you're thinking about students who are maybe starting at a community college and earning an associate's, and then transferring onto a 4-year program in that field, once they graduate with that 4-year degree, that bachelor's degree, there are a lot of different opportunities that folks go into, right? The teachers we just saw, those early childhood education majors go on to become secretaries and admin assistants. They do become teachers, social and human services assistants, HR specialists, insurance sales agents, substance abuse counselors. There are many different fields, and this list goes on and on, that those folks go into. So it's really important to include some of these other occupations and really the outcomes that these students see when they graduate with that bachelor's degree, which in this case, they earn an average salary of $50,500. Now, because this is specifically bachelor's, it obviously is looking at what folks what the bachelor's outcomes look like. But there is another data set that we've recently added and we'll be rolling out in the next month, which looks at data from people profile data that we've pulled into our system to be able to see for folks with, this now goes down to the associate's level. So we can see with folks, for folks with a certain associate's degree, what are all of the different jobs that those people have had over the course of their particular profile, however many years that might be. And here we have 2 examples just to highlight the differences in what people can actually do with a certain degree. So here we're looking at child development graduates, so specifically from with an associate's. And we can see for this particular person, they started and owns their own childcare operation beginning in 1997. Moved on to a local government job as an area manager, and then back to childcare and program development and so on, all the way through to an early childhood education program. So again, they did move around and probably moved up to certain positions over the years. And this is obviously looking at a long-term career plan. So maybe at first they started off in an industry that would make more sense in terms of what they directly prepared to do. However, then we look at another example of somebody who graduated with a child development degree at the associate's level. And this career is a lot different than what we just saw, with this person starting out in retail and ultimately moving over to the healthcare industry and working as a healthcare administrator and ultimately medical records coordinator. So this is data that we're now beginning to incorporate to see what folks actually do with a certain type of degree. But as you can see, it's very helpful to look at and see what these folks' outcomes are as you're thinking about what do people do with an associate's degree in this example. Now, with that, let's dive back into looking at what the trends show for the most recent month. And so here we're now looking at, we have a database that tracks job postings by month. So here we'll be looking at the number of US job postings for, in this case, we're looking at associates and below grads, which as we look at this particular slide here and we focus on July, first off, unlike the student demand trends, which have been up each of the months this year, job postings are down for folks with an associate's degree or lower, down 19% in July. So certainly not a great trend. It's at least a little closer than we were in June based on the overall percentage decline. But this downward trend as compared to last year is continuing based on the number of job postings that we're seeing for these types of degree levels. And as I said, it's not as down as we were compared year over year, and is also up, albeit slightly, 1% compared to the amounts in June. So what are the good news? Well, here are the top job postings based on the highest volumes by occupation for July of 2023. At the top of the list, we've got registered nurses, which has continued to be one of the larger fields in terms of just the total volume of people working in the industry, as well as the number of postings that are being posted to the web, hiring folks. Then we have retail salespersons at a very close second with over 58,000 job postings in July of 23. Then we drop down to 34,000 with general and operations managers, and then drop to 24,000 computer user support specialists, and so on down to the lower 20s with secretaries and admin assistants, then customer service representatives, home and health, personal care aides, nursing assistants, maintenance and repair workers, and rounding out our top 10, we've got elementary school teachers, excluding special education. So these are your largest. And again, as you were kind of thinking through and putting the full puzzle together in terms of evaluating potential program opportunities, some of these are certainly in line with some of the student demand volumes that we were seeing in the prior section of today's presentation. Now, looking at the occupations based on the highest growth in July of 2023. Again, this is focusing on the associates and below. We see an odd one at the top just based on the number of, or I should say the sheer size of growth, but Postal Service, excuse me, mail carriers at 177% growth, which is nowhere near close to the others we see on the list here, with dietitians and nutritionists dropping down to a more realistic 9% growth. Based on the number of job postings for associates and below degrees. Then we have physical therapist assistants at 8%, psychiatric technicians at 7%, coaches and scouts at 5%, exercise trainers and group fitness instructors, and then bookkeeping, accounting, and auditing clerks. Finally, teachers assistants and self-enrichment teachers. And lastly, first line supervisors of food prep, which is essentially flat. So this is obviously focusing on those areas where it specifically posts a degree, which is not always the case, but it's certainly worth looking at to see for those jobs that request only needing an associate's or a certificate or something else in the diploma space. This is what's growing the fastest based on the July volumes. Again, similar to what we were looking at with the Coursera data, which is more focused on courses and what students should be learning within a particular program. Here's some information that we also pull out of the job postings that look at the skills that employers are including in those job postings. So here we're looking at, again, just purely at volumes, looking at the highest skills in demand based on what has been mentioned in job postings. And not surprising, it's always the case. Microsoft Office is number one, just because it's used, whether it be Outlook, PowerPoint, Excel, it's used in so many different industries. Then number two on the list, which is interesting, we've got mental health. Which has certainly been a hot topic the last several years in our country. So in terms of mentions and job postings, that's still showing up as high volumes. Then we have accounting and billing showing up with over 30,000 mentions in July 2023. Then nursing care, merchandising, career development, housekeeping, rehabilitation, and finally licensing showing up in our 10 highest skills mentions and job postings. Here we're looking at the highest soft skills that are in demand. So again, just looking at the volumes in terms of how often they're mentioned in job postings, we're pulling out what we refer to as the soft skills in our job postings analysis. And at number one in these, you can see these volumes as compared to the prior slide are a lot higher. But we're now at over 220,000 mentions of management. Then we have customer service, which is extremely important, planning, then leadership, supervision, scheduling, collaboration, research, monitoring, and writing at 58,000 mentions. So again, these aren't necessarily going to help you identify what programs to offer, but as you're thinking about aligning with what employer needs are, really digging into the skills data can be very helpful, not just looking here like we are nationally, but really drilling down into your market and potentially to specific employers to see what are the skills that we should be teaching our students within those programs that we're offering today, or if we're not offering programs that fit with certain areas in here, is that something we should look into, and what does the student demand look like for those? And finally, just before we move on to our program of the month, our last slide on our trends is looking at the certifications in job postings. So these are the 10 most requested certifications, with half of them, as you see on the slide here, being in healthcare. Those being licensed practical nurse, certified medical assistant, basic life support certification, certified nursing assistant, and basic cardiac life support. But actually number one on the list was security clearance at over 8,000. We've got a forklift certification, ServSafe certification, and then food safety certification and secret clearance, not to be confused with security clearance. So again, just thinking through the certifications, the healthcare ones are interesting in that some of these are specific programs that you can teach, like LPN and medical assisting. And then just some others to think through that, again, could probably be more a part of a group of programs, not just one single program. Now, switching gears, we always like to pick a program of the month to drill down on, and more so to share just how to use the data, but also what you can get out of something like a program evaluation system, and specifically with the external market data. And this is really how you start to bring together all of the information that we've just walked through on the trends to be able to evaluate a program as it compares to other potential programs that you could offer or that you are currently offering. So in terms of what our market system focuses on, it's looking at the student demand, employment opportunities, competition, and then degree fit, which is really just focusing on, is this program, does this make sense at the specific degree level that we're looking at? And so in terms of how we do all of this, we use something called percentiling, and that allows us to score all 1,500 plus programs based on the IPED 6-digit zip codes, and see how each program compares to every other program. So here is a list, an example of an associates and below program ranking. So again, focusing on those relevant degree levels, and then looking at what programs score well compared to other programs. So first, we've got our program list here, which is, again, those 6-digit CIP codes from IPEDS. And here we're ranking it based on the overall score, which I mentioned is a percentile. So if we look at computer science, it says 98 here. It's a dark green bar and the largest bar, meaning it's in the 98th percentile, meaning that it's in the top 2% compared to all programs based on its overall score. So there's 1,500 programs. So that puts it roughly in the top 30 programs based on its overall score. And this overall score is made up of over 50 different metrics that we score on across the other bars you see here, which are categories for student demand, which computer science scores in the 99th percentile, competitive intensity, which in this case is at the 0, which means it's a very competitive market, actually. A low percentile is not a good sign. So in this case, a small number means, or low percentile means a low score, which in this case would indicate that it's very competitive, versus liberal arts where it is obviously competitive and that many schools offer it, but the programs are all very large because it's capturing a very large transfer population. So that's does not score as well. But then we jump to the jobs or employment category, which is back up in the 99th percentile. So the top 1%, and finally degree fit, which is again more of a knockout category. So as long as you're not zero, it makes sense at that degree level. And before I now dive into these numbers, the program that we've chosen for our program of the month scores in the 99th percentile, so top 3% in its electrical and communications engineering tech. And here we start to now view the scorecard, which we've got different pieces of our scorecard that track each of those categories. So here we're looking at the student demand section, which scored in the 93rd percentile with an overall score of 13 points. And specifically, we're now looking at those same volumes that we were tracking earlier nationally. Now we're able to see it for a specific program and see how it compares to other programs. So in terms of our Google search volumes over the past 3 months, it's in the 66th percentile, which that's a value of 16,770. So it's not green, which is not great. It's sort of in that middle category, which in terms of the recent searches is, again, as you think about, there's 1,500 programs. As you get outside the top 10% or the 90th percentile and lower, you're already outside the top 150, which is a lot of programs. So that's not a great sign. But as we look at the other categories or sources we track, international page views, while not a ton at this award level, as in the 94th percentile and high for a program of this size. And then as we look at the sum of the on-ground and online completions, we're now in the 95th percentile. And finally, as we look at new student enrollment volumes, we're seeing numbers that are in the 97th percentile. So these are both very helpful or healthy numbers, I should say, in terms of volume in those two sources. And now as we add growth, this program does not quite look as appealing as it did when we were focusing solely on volumes. So if this is something that you're not teaching today, you may want to discuss this further before you make a decision, because while it's big, based on some of those volume indicators, it's in the bottom percentiles and declining across all 3 sources of data, albeit pretty much flat in the new student enrollment. Down 21 units is not a whole lot on 6,500, but certainly not a good sign being flat with our more current volume of Google searches down 6% year over year. And these highlight the percentages you've got here. So now moving on to employment. So again, starting to build out this overall program evaluation, we can see that employment scores for this program in the 96th percentile, which is in the top 4%, which is a great sign for this particular program, with our total job postings volume over the past 12 months in the 95th percentile, which is a great sign based on job volumes for this particular field. And then we look at the BLS current employment, interestingly enough, is not quite in line with that. It drops down to the 85th percentile, but still over 100,000 jobs that exist in this particular field. But unfortunately, we're looking at the historical growth rate as well from BLS, and that's down just under 1%. So again, it's kind of in line with, at least in terms of the year-over-year growth we saw for the student demand, the year-over-year growth for the jobs is actually similar in that it's, not quite flat, but 1% is not a huge decline as we're looking at this. And then as we look at some of the other metrics like job postings per graduate, it's in the top 10% for that particular field. And we've got the wages highlighted here, which is sort of in the middle here based on the wage outcomes for this particular field. So it's an important number to track as you're thinking about students paying back potential loans, but just also thinking through their later career outcomes. We can see what the 10th percentile is, which might be more of a proxy for entry level, and what the mean wages are at 42,000 and then 64,000, which is honestly a fair wage, especially if they can come out of school earning closer to the mean than to the 10th percentile. Next up, we have competitive intensity. So this here is a very competitive program is what this indicates. We've got a score of -5, putting it in the 19th percentile. So the bottom 20% is not a great sign. We've got over 329 campuses across the nation offering this program or reporting completions to it, really is how that's defined, with 6 fewer schools offering it or reporting offering it in the most recent year compared to the prior year. We can see here the other metrics we look at are the average and median program sizes, and this is really what can offset the fact that there's a lot of competition is if all those schools have healthy program sizes. And in this case, that's not true. We're sitting at 7 completions at the median. And it does go up a little bit as we look at the average to 15. That, can be driven by some larger players increasing that average. But, looking at something like the median at 7 is not a great sign. And that is actually down from the prior year, which makes the percentage look bad at 14%, but it dropped 1 off a small amount. And then finally, just highlighting some of these others, we've got the national online institutions, only 21. So this indicates that this is not really a field that can or is offered online, which is, maybe for this, not all that helpful if that's obvious, but certainly as you're looking across other programs, it is helpful to understand how many schools are we competing with that offer this online, which may not exist in our local market. So that's where looking at the number of institutions with in-market students, which is a field we've calculated, enhancing the IPEDS data with some other data from NC SARA to be able to indicate, while, for example, we might be looking at a local market with 1 other school offering this program, but there could be 20 schools nationally with students taking this program online located in our market, even though that school might not be located there. Right, there could be the University of Phoenix, Western Governors, a number of SNHU online national players that are attracting students from your market that can be a helpful way of looking at competition, but also student demand. And finally, our last category of degree fit just looks at, again, what are the relevant degree levels that students are receiving based on completions, as well as what based on people employed in this field, what degrees do they have? So here it gives you the ability to see, again, is this particular program right for the type of degree we want to offer, whether it be a certificate or an associate's. And we can see the splits between completions nationally at 37% earning a certificate and 43% in associates. And similarly, we can see that the educational attainment of the workforce, there's about a quarter with no college degree, but then we've got 31% some college and 24% associates. So this certainly puts it in line with the types of degrees we'd be offering. And finally, this is just a slide to indicate, here's pulling it all together to come up with that total score that puts in the 97th percentile, but also be able to see it all in one place in terms of, is there a lot of green or a lot of pink? And the last thing when evaluating programs is really looking at benchmark data to understand if this is something you offer today, how does our cost and contribution per student credit hour compare to other schools offering this program? Or for new programs, is it more costly or less costly than other programs to teach? And here's an example of just a particular chart that we have data for, where we can see how the average contribution and the 25th median and 75th contribution numbers look based on other schools offering this program. And here is just a quick snapshot to show how it compares to other programs, with some schools in the bottom 25th being a pretty low number in terms of it's the lowest we see out of this list of 5 programs based on its contribution per student credit hour, which is not a great sign. And the same is true as we get out to or look at the average bar, that it's certainly lower. So This can be helpful for new, but is extremely helpful for current programs in evaluating how they do on contribution, but also cost per student credit hour compared to other institutions offering those same courses at those same award levels. So we can see charts like this to see, first off, are costs in line, or in this example here of fake institution, our costs by the different award levels are very all over the place, I would say, ranging from I don't know, low $100 per student credit all the way up to over 1,200. And that's not quite in line with what other institutions are seeing at the 100 award level for this particular type of course, engineering tech. But on average, our costs are still lower across all the different course levels that we're offering. So again, this can be helpful information to use to assess just how efficiently are we operating our particular courses within a program or the program as a whole, and how do those compare to other institutions, so that you're comparing more apples to apples, in that we're comparing engineering tech to other engineering tech programs, not comparing engineering tech to computer science or to psychology programs, which will have much different cost structures in terms of those teaching costs. So that concludes our webinar for today. Just to summarize, demand for associates programs is strong, and certificate programs, and that's specifically at the for student demand. Google search is up 10% in July, new student enrollment up 4% and 2%, which is a great sign for the most recent years, which is turning that trend around. The program's growing the fastest in terms of new enrollments. We had CDL, commercial truck and bus driver, at certificate, and cybersecurity at the associates. Job postings, unfortunately, were down quite a bit, 19% year over year, with the postal service mail carriers growing a huge amount. It was 177% we saw. And then finally, the one program we looked at is certainly a healthy program in terms of the demand volumes. Both the student demand and job postings volumes are high, but growth is flat to down across those sources. And it's a very competitive program. So that concludes our webinar. A couple things before I open it up to see if there are any questions. We do have our webinars coming up. Again, these occur monthly, but we'll be switching gears to an accelerator series for our fall monthly webinars, where we'll feature higher education experts and guest speakers from an institution to talk about how to accelerate growth. And we'll also be hosting a panel exclusively with these partners on how to drive growth with marketing, curriculum, and tuition in our November webinar for both the community colleges and the bachelor's and above degrees. So just a reminder to tune into those throughout the fall to hear from some other experts in the industry. And finally, I'll just share our podcast is available to listen to, hosted by our CEO, Bob Atkins, focused on growth strategies in higher education. It's called Grow, 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 and you can listen to it scanning these codes on Spotify or Apple. So with that, I will conclude today's webinar. Feel free, as always, to email us if you have any questions. You can find any of our contacts on our team page at grayassociates.com, or you can give us a call.
So Winnell, do we have time to pull up one program? We have a request for cybersecurity in the associate's level and commercial truck driving certificate.
Yes, I have that open already, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. And here we are looking at cybersecurity. Is my screen sharing?
Yes, it is.
Great. So just really quickly, just because I know we have 5 minutes, I'll touch on the high level story that we see here. This is set at associates and below, and we're looking at cybersecurity 11.1003. Immediately the system is designed to allow you to kind of lean on the color coding, so we can see student demand is strong. I'm seeing that dark green, Employment is also strong with that dark green. And then the why, why is it strong? We'd be able to find in the individual line items. So the story here that I'm seeing is strong student demand, strong employment. The real questions here are going to exist within the competitive intensity. Things to highlight in student demand. It looks like all of the size metrics are doing very well, from Google search all the way down to completions, and the growth metrics are doing well also. So then over at employment, really quickly, I'll highlight, something that strikes me here would be, I'd probably want to look at things like job postings per graduate here. Just a saturation. We're seeing 7.4 job postings per graduate. We're seeing a large number of job posting totals, and healthier wages here compared to some of the other programs. Okay. When I'm looking at the competitive intensity, again, this is a very, very competitive program. And not just that, but the median program completions at 6 are kind of just above average. So a lot of players in this market, a lot of institutions, a lot of campuses offering this program, and the median program completions could be a little better in this case. Although the averages are very strong here. So there could be some big players in the market, and a lot of other folks trying to keep up. Okay. I'll highlight, this is a program that completes 22% of completions online, which is in the 83rd percentile. So it'd probably be best suited to offer a program like this in the online format. The last thing I'll highlight here is all the way to the right is just a degree fit. This will give you some insight into some of the other award levels this program tends to complete in. When we're looking at the national market, only 16% are at the associate's level, 25% certificate, 29% bachelor's, and 24% master's. So there's a wide range of award levels completing the zip code. But then when we look at the workforce, 46% bachelor's and 23% master's, meaning, folks working in a field directly related to this do have somewhat of a bachelor's or master's credential here. Not sure if there's really anything else to highlight here. I know we have 2 minutes left. I don't know if there's any specific questions for cybersecurity.
You maybe just highlight too the list of competitors, to just give some sense of, that's a lot, but maybe who are they and how large
So I'll
or
jump
large.
into the competitive intensity summary. And again, you'll see a very dense map here. A lot of circles, meaning a lot of campuses offering this program. And on the right, we can sort this from high to low on ground or online completions, and we'll see things like University of Phoenix, Arizona, and a number of other institutions here offering this program at associates and below. So big, huge online presence, really.
Great. Well, I think that's helpful for sharing folks today, just how detailed we can get. But being mindful that we have less than a minute left, I want to make sure I say thank you all for joining today, or if you're watching the recording later, I appreciate you listening in and watching. And I don't see any other questions, so I'll end it here. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or thoughts for us. Thank you.